Okay, for those online, we're ready to begin. Let's open with a word of prayer. Holy God, we thank you that we can gather together week by week on your holy Sabbath. As we try to understand the institutions that you have provided for our needs, we ask that you would give us not only understanding but wisdom, that we might not only know the truth, but we would know how to apply that truth to our lives and to this movement. In Jesus' name, Amen. I want to welcome everybody to the first of two presentations today. I want to begin with a quote. It's on the subject of marriage. So I don't know if we're able to project that on the screen. It can be found in various places, but I'm going to be reading from Manuscript Releases, Volume 10. In the English, it's page 184, paragraphs 1 and 2. The translators already have it. So I'll read in English, and then the translators can read in their own languages. I'll read the whole paragraph. True marriage is not a lottery. I wish to present before you some things existing in yourself that have been at the foundation of the sorrow and disappointment which you unjustly charge upon others. I have often read these words: marriage is a lottery. Some act as if they believed the statement, and their married life testifies that it is such to them. But true marriage is not a lottery. Marriage was instituted in Eden after the creation of Adam. The Lord said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him an help meet," which means suitable, for him. Genesis 2:18. When the Lord presented Eve to Adam, angels of God were witnesses to the ceremony. But there are few couples who are completely united when the marriage ceremony is performed. The form of words spoken over the two who take the marriage vow does not make them a unit, which means one. In their future life is to be the blending of the two in wedlock. It may be made a real happy union if each will give to the other true heart affection. Just going to read the second paragraph now.
Ok, on va lire le deuxième paragraphe.
But time strips marriage of the romance with which imagination has clothed it, and then the thoughts find entrance into the mind through Satan's suggestions. We do not love each other as we supposed. Expel it from the mind. Do not linger over it. Let each, forgetful of self, refuse to entertain the idea the ideas that Satan would be glad to have you cherish. He, Satan, will work to make you suspicious, jealous of every little thing that shall furnish the least occasion in order to alienate your affections from each other. Life is a real matter, and it can be made unbearable by the husband and wife.
Elisa, j'ai pas
When
la
the
suite.
romance is gone, let
Elisa,
each
j'ai pas la
think
suite de la
not
traduction.
after a sentimental order, but how they can make the married life what God would be pleased to have it. Okay, so I don't know if everybody understood everything that they read, but I just want to go back to paragraph 1. So we know that the subtitle for this section is that marriage is not a lottery, it's not a chance. I assume everybody knows what a lottery is. It's like a gamble. So this is a letter to somebody. You can see from the first sentence the context. But she's going to take this particular situation and turn it and explain it as a broad principle that all of us can learn something from. She begins by saying, we're a few sentences in, marriage was instituted in Eden. And she quotes from Genesis chapter 2. Now, I'm sure that all of you have read Genesis. And if you were to read the section that she's referring to, which is the last part of Genesis 2, you'll see in the Bible there's no mention that Adam and Eve are married. All it says is that God believes it's not good that Adam is alone, and so God is going to decide to give Adam a partner. And you'll see it's on the board that this partner is someone that is suitable for Adam's needs. And that's about all it really says. And Ellen White's going to turn that information and say that was actually a marriage that happened. But there are no words directly indicating that. Now, I'm not saying that Ellen White is wrong. I think it's reasonable to assume that that was indeed a marriage. But we're given no information, no details of the ceremony itself, or the vows that were taken by those two people. And therefore we have to be careful that we don't superimpose our ideas of marriage upon that marriage. And we have to be careful as we read Ellen White's commentary or her understanding of that ceremony. If you have any questions at any moment, please raise your hand so that we can clarify things, or you can express your thoughts and ideas. So I want to just pause there for a moment and come back to the passage in a second. Recently, I think it may have been last week, it was at the last camp meeting that I spoke at. It may have been in the UK or Germany, so it may not have been the very last one. So we have been discussing various models when we look at the history of the world from the beginning to the end. And in our movement, we've used different terms for that. I don't know if anybody remembers two of the terms or the models that we have used. So I'm looking for just two short phrases or titles to give these two models as we have progressed in our understanding. So as you're thinking about that, we'll understand that we do line upon line. So we're going to take a history of 6,000 years and we break that history into segments. We call them dispensations. And I hope we all understand the reason we do that. There are two reasons. So, as we break this history into components, there are two reasons. One of them is to see the development of truth, or the great controversy, or information, however you want to see it, but it's about development. I don't know how you view it, but when I see the term development, I see progression. So, in terms of the line that we've just drawn, this would be the steps 1 to 5. You see a development of truth. And at each step, the idea is that the truth becomes clearer. So that's the first reason we do that. And the second reason is to identify repeating patterns. In the movement, we refer to this as line upon line. So we take this singular history of 6,000 years, and in this picture we have 4 segments or 4 dispensations. and we cut this line into 4 pieces. And when we say line upon line, what we do is we take those 4 dispensations or segments and lay them one on top of the other. There's a science or a methodology to that. And there's also an art or a skill. We can all learn the science, but we're not all competent with respect to the skill. You all good? So each of us can learn the information, the rules, the methodology. But it takes some skill, which I've called an art, to turn that skill into something that actually works. And some of us are just better at it than others. So all I'm saying is that when you divide this singular line into segments, there are rules about that, but there's also an art to it. So I don't think any of that is new. If you only did one, or if you only did one of the two, you can get into problems because you don't know if you've made mistakes. So if you can get this singular line and interrogate it as a development and as a repeating pattern, and you can get both versions of the story to align correctly, then you have what we could call 2 witnesses. Often when people just look at the repeating patterns, they think that's sufficient. But you will be prone to make mistakes if you do that. That's why you also need to look at the development or the progression of truth. Does anybody have any questions on that or not understand what I've said? So, if we're all okay with that, we have approached this singular line I've just put of 6,000 years, and over the years we have developed, I'm just going to call them models. And in some recent studies I said there were 2 clear models that we have come up with. If you want to assign those models to names, one would be Elder Jeff and one would be Elder Tess. They both took everything that I've spoken about here and gave 2 models. And I think sometimes we've not understood that they're the same story, because they sound quite different. And when Tess did it, She didn't say explicitly. I'm just doing what Jeff did, but I'm explaining it in different words. So I think some of us thought she was doing something brand new or radical. It certainly was radical, but it wasn't new. Okay, I've given you enough time to think. Anybody give me an idea of what those two models are? Muriel.
So I'm just gonna say what I understand. One of the models I would say would be Eden to Eden, Alpha and Omega, beginning and the end.
Okay,
Those are the ones that I would say.
so I'm just going to write those down. So Muriel said Eden to Eden, and she said Alpha and Omega. Alpha and Omega means beginning and end. Anyone else? That answer is correct, but in some recent studies, I didn't use those ones. I used some different titles. So I'll tell you what I said. So the first one was taken from Revelation chapter 2 and 3. 7 churches. So we developed some models taken from Revelation 2 and 3, which is the story of 7 churches. And what we did was showed both a progression and a repeat of history. So I think we're all familiar with what Revelation teaches. Those 7 churches are 7 experiences or dispensations of the Christian church. That's not unique to us or Adventists. All Christians know that. But what did we do with that information? We said, if that's the history of modern Israel or spiritual Israel, you have to have a history of ancient or literal Israel. Hope that all makes sense. And if Israel is always the same thing, which it is, there's only one Israel, only one kingdom. What we then can see is when you look between ancient and modern Israel, they must look the same. And if you can define a pattern for one of them, which we're given in Revelation, the pattern of the other Israel must be identical. So what we did was, we said, I'll call it ancient Israel. We said there must be 7 churches there. So this is our creation, our assumption, and that's based upon, I'll call it the truth of modern or spiritual Israel, which is given in the book of Revelation. And we know that there are 7 churches there. So we have a progression and we have a repeating pattern. Everybody okay with that? Once you do that, you can do some really clever, significant things. One of the things you can do is to acknowledge that at this point of history here, there's an arrow to, you have 2 churches at once. You have number 7 and number 1. And they're coexisting. And if you can see that from this model, you can now go to the New Testament, and if you kept to this framework, it explains so much information that you find in the New Testament. So all I'm going to write here is this model. I'll say 7 and 1 explains the tension. The tension that you see in the New Testament scriptures. Jesus is going to come and he's going to speak about equality. We'll call that number 1. And then he's going to say, in the same breath, if you have any questions, who are you supposed to ask? The Jewish leaders. That's number 7. So you see, I'll call it a contradiction, or what I put on the board is a tension. I'll give one more example. Paul will say, under God, there's no difference between men and women. Sounds like equality, doesn't it? And then he says, when women come to church, they should have long hair and cover it. That's not number 1. It's going back to number 7, isn't it? Over and over again, you'll see this tension. And when we, in this movement, developed this model of 7 churches, whether you realized it or not, a large part of what we were doing was trying to understand and then explain this New Testament tension. Unless you've got any questions, I'll move on. So that's what these 7 churches did for us. Curtis.
When Jesus and Paul create that tension, Are they doing it to gradually phase in a truth and not rupture the system? Or are they, while bringing in the principles of truth, or are they also, while phasing in principles of truth? But they're also trying to instill in the people this recognition of institutional authority. Does my question make sense?
To me, it does. I want to answer it this way, which won't answer your question. Human beings are made up of different components. We normally break it down between mind and body. So when we think of the mind, we can break the mind down into certain sections or segments. Often we think about higher or lower powers. That's Ellen White. Or we might think of fast brain, slow brain. That's how we've begun to consider the human brain in our discussions. Sympathetic, parasympathetic mode. So the summary of all of those concepts, I'm going to try to answer Curtis's question in that framework. So as humans, I call it the human mind. We do things quickly and slowly. This is not fast brain, slow brain. Very quickly, we can absorb information. We'll call it facts. That happens very quickly. What happens more slowly, I'm going to call it the emotional acceptance. So, whilst I agree with I'm going to call it the point that Curtis was making, for our purposes, I want to say it this way. They can talk equality. Those two men, Jesus and Paul, whether they realize it or not, consciously, or God is directing them, it doesn't matter. But there's an acknowledgement that people's emotional response to the truth lags behind. It lags behind the facts. So you can know things, but it doesn't mean you'll accept them. I'm going to say accept them emotionally. those two things are out of phase or out of sync with one another. So you might think about it this way. When you came to the truth, whatever event you want to mark for that, when Tess began to teach, when Jeff began to teach, when you became a Christian, it doesn't matter. When you were confronted with the truth, you brought something with you. And what you brought with you was your life experience. I'm going to give it a bad name. You brought your baggage. We'll give it a more formal name. You brought your biases. Everything about you, your pain, your hurt, we'll just call it your life experience, you brought with you. And when the truth comes to you, you might say, that sounds good, or you might say, that sounds scary. However you respond to the truth, if it's delivered correctly, most people understand what they're hearing, but they won't accept what they're hearing. And that lack of acceptance is due to what I'm just going to call your baggage. When Ellen White talks about the first angel's message, when we have discussed this in the movement, we've approached it in that framework. This framework of an intellectual assent to the truth, then an emotional acceptance of that truth, is how the first angel works. I mean the delivery of the message of that angel, not the angel themselves. So Jesus and Paul are going to deliver this truth, but people emotionally cannot accept it, both on an individual, which we're not interested in, but on a corporate or a group level, it can't be accepted. All of the nuances and complexities of what I've just said is you can find in this model of 7 and 1. The second model that we were given, this was in the dispensation of Elder Jeff, number 1. That was number 1. Number 2 was in the dispensation of Elder Tess. And she, I'm suggesting, took the same model, the same framework, but labelled it differently. How did she label it? Not lines of progression, no. I'm going to start it. I'll say lines. So the first part is correct. Okay, I'll do the answer then. Failure and success. Lines of failure and lines of success. She didn't say, I'm teaching 7 churches. I'm saying that that's what she was doing. So she will go to, as Muriel said, this alpha and omega concept. And you'll see that her lines look very similar. In fact, identical to the 7 churches lines. So this would be 1717. But Elder Tess isn't going to do that. We would have alpha and omega. Alpha and omega. But she never taught alpha and omega. That was already in the movement's consciousness anyway. She would talk about failure and success. Are we okay with that? So she chose those words specifically. Whatever her reasons for doing so. So I'm not here to discuss that. But if you don't understand why she used those words, the context of that, you might understand these repeating patterns in the wrong way. Because if I were to say to you, what does failure mean? And who's failing? It might lead you to incorrect conclusions. So you have to be careful when you go to model number 2. Most people believe that God cannot fail, which would indicate that if there's any failure, it must be on our part. And you'll begin to see that that model or that concept isn't correct. It's not about people failing and people succeeding. This is how far the movement has got. And I'm saying there's a number 3, a third model, which needs to be discussed. We've already begun to touch on it. And I've said we've begun to discuss it in the framework of the book of Hebrews. And the book of Hebrews, what do people think the book of Hebrews is about? The essence of that book. Curtis? Oh, Sorry, Shemaine?
The old versus the new covenant.
So, Shemaine has said that the book of Hebrews, I call it the book, is about the old covenant and the new. Curtis? The same. Sometimes people use the term testament and covenant interchangeably. That's why we have the Old Testament and the New Testament. Or we have the Old and New Covenant. So, do people think, how do you understand the Old Covenant? Was that failure or success? When you think about the Old Covenant. If you're not sure what the Old Covenant is, it can be expressed in different ways. I'll say the sacrificial system. It's not the covenant itself, but it's a large part of the outflow of that covenant. Do we think it succeeded or failed? That was a question to anybody, but nobody wants to participate today, except our visitors and you. Does no one understand my question? Are you too afraid to answer? We didn't know. If you're just going to repeat what you said, I could have just done it quickly. But
I'd say that the old covenant is a failure, was a failure.
okay. So someone said that the old covenant failed. And because it failed, we had to replace it with a new one. Does anybody disagree with that? You disagree? Tell me what you think.
I don't know if the word failure would be the right term to use. Because according to what I understand, this covenant was necessary for Christ to come. I wouldn't use the word failure.
What would you use?
Maybe it's outdated.
No longer suitable, you mean? Did it do its job properly? Did it fulfill its mission?
I think so, yes. I think so. maybe the people didn't do their job correctly, but it did. The covenant did.
So did the covenant succeed in its mission?
Is this a trick question?
No, I've just reframed the question, just slightly different, but used the word success to say this, to ask the same question. My, my first question was, did it accomplish its mission? You said yes. So I just reframed it and said, did it succeed in its mission? And then you said, am I tricking you?
Jesus came after that covenant, so I would say yes.
Yes, that it succeeded in its mission. Yeah? So you say it was a success, and you said it was a failure. So after her hearing her explanation, do you still think it was failure?
If I follow through with your thoughts, her thoughts,
So she doesn't agree. I didn't hear the first part.
she didn't. She just started. If I follow through with her thoughts, she didn't. Vas-y. Jesus did come after that. But did the people receive him? Did they recognize him?
She answered that question. Keep them. If you remember what she said, she separated the covenant from the people. She said the covenant didn't fail, and she never developed what happened to the people. But she separated them. Yes, what?
Indeed. Indeed.
I'm only asking about the covenant, not asking about people.
But the covenant includes the people.
What was the covenant? How would you explain the old covenant?
The old covenant is, in a way, the connection, the alliance made between God and His people.
And you think that alliance failed?
Yes, and its final result, yes.
In the new covenant, has that failed during the last 2,000 years? Or has that been very successful?
It's not over, so I can't say if it's succeeded or not.
From when it began up till now, has it been successful? Yes. So when the church went into started following Jezebel, went into apostasy under the new covenant, you would say that's success or failure.
Failure.
When the Millerites made all their mistakes, when Jesus didn't return in Ellen White's time, was that success or failure?
Failure.
So the new covenant isn't looking very good.
There's part A and part B.
Okay, I won't keep on pushing you. Curtis had a comment to this original question, whether or not the old covenant failed or succeeded.
When Abby spoke, she separated the people in the agreement with the agreement. So she didn't define the success or failure based on the people's behavior. She explained it contained with regards to the agreement, the covenant. And from what I understood, she said, she spoke about how that old system was supposed to do a job. And I think it did the job. It was provisional. It was meant to accomplish something. So I don't want to try and manipulate the definitions of failure and success. But in its standard definition, both covenants succeed in my mind. Both covenants succeed. Because in what you described in the conversation you just had, under both systems, a remnant comes out that learned the lesson that both of those systems were trying to teach.
I want to try and bring us all together if possible. Don't be confused by the Bible verse I'm going to quote now. Because before I spoke about the sacrificial system and connected that to the old, now I'm going to use a different title or a different perspective of the same thing, the old. So this is found in the book of Galatians now. Galatians chapter 3. So we're not going to talk about the sacrificial system. Without even looking, I don't know if you're familiar with Galatians 3, what word have I picked up? What's Galatians 3 about? Just one word. Not church. It's the law. It's going to deal with the law. So I'll go to verse 23. So Galatians 3:23. I tried to do it first, but I'm going to ask the question. The 10 Commandments, which covenant is that? Old or new? So think about that. 3:23. But before faith came, we were kept under the law, shut up unto the faith which should afterwards be revealed. I'm going to rephrase that verse. In the past, that's the context, before faith came, we were under the law, under the authority of law, and we did not have access to faith, because faith would come afterwards. So what comes first, according to the verse? Law. And what comes second? Faith. So even if you don't know what faith means, and even if you don't know what the law is, you know that from the verse. Originally, all you have is law, and you're stuck with that because faith hasn't come yet. So just from that, you know there's a sequence. First law, then faith. Curtis?
Is it that faith hasn't come yet? Is it that faith hasn't come yet, or faith hasn't been revealed yet? I know they might sound similar.
I'm just going to leave it as I said. Verse 24. Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. So, verse 24 is either a development or an explanation of what has been said in verse 23. Now, the law is being framed as a teacher. And it says to bring us to Christ. I'm going to just change that, and I'm going to say to teach us about Christ. And the reason for that is so that we can be justified. What does justified mean? Just give me one substitute word for justified. Or 2 words. Someone said? Justified? If I just had justified means just.
Made just.
Made just?
Made right.
Can I say made right?
The same thing in French.
Yeah?
It's the same thing for us.
Okay. I know it's the righteousness and justification in French are the same, I understand. So, step 2, how are you justified? How are you made correct? I don't use right, I'm going to use now correct. It says in the verse, last part, by faith. Now, step 2. So, step 1, how were you made correct then? By the law. So in the step 1, you're made correct or right by law, and in the future you'll be made right or correct by faith. We'll just do one more verse. 25. But after that faith is come, we are no longer under the schoolmaster. So now that faith has come, because it wasn't here before, you're no longer under a teacher. We could say like you're graduated. Yeah? Everybody okay with that? So someone, you've received your diploma. I think that's how it got translated. I think if you can see it that way, we all know that you only receive your diploma after a successful education, not a failed education. So I don't know if these passages help us to see that the old covenant didn't fail, it was actually successful. Even if some people didn't pass the exam, didn't get their diploma, somebody did, and therefore it succeeded to take you from law to faith. And in this context, you know what the faith is. I'm not saying who the faith is, I'm saying what the faith is. It's Jesus, isn't it? Jesus is the faith that's being referred to here. If you can see that, then the verse that says Jesus is the fulfillment of the law, you'll see that this is an explanation of what that verse would mean. Jesus says, I didn't come to destroy, I came to fulfill. Why did he say that? Because people were saying, you're destroying the law. And which law was that? You can either go for 10 Commandments or Moses's, because it's the same. They could see the fulfillment of these verses before these verses were given, that the old had come to its end and the new was starting. And when Jesus comes to replace the law, it looks like Jesus is throwing the law away. Which is why I asked, where do you place the 10 Commandments? In the old or the new? Because I can guarantee you that every Adventist, almost, will place the 10 Commandments in the new, not the old. And I'm suggesting you can already begin to see that that's not correct. The 10 Commandments are connected and part of the old covenant. They carry it around in a box. And if I were to ask you today, if those 10 commandments were in fact connected to the new, how comes we don't have them anymore? Where have they gone to? They disappeared. That's why we don't have them. Because the whole system was washed away. If you say to me, but now we have the 10 commandments in our heart, I'd never have any problem with that. And you'd also have to say, you have the whole sacrificial system in your heart as well. But most people don't conceptualize it that way. Most Christians run away from the sacrificial system. So, in summary, what I want to say is this. We have 3 more models in our movement now. And each one has been a progressive revelation of truth. Seven churches, lines of failure and success, an old and new covenant. And the thing is, you'll probably say, old and new covenants aren't anything new. So what are we talking about? There's nothing new there. And what I'm suggesting is what is new is to frame and understand those covenants correctly. And if you don't understand what the 7 churches were teaching, and if you don't understand what lines of failure and success were teaching, you'll be stuck in the incorrect, in the wrong Adventist model of old and new covenants. Everything you thought you knew is probably wrong. And that's why we're examining these things. At least some of us think that we're definitely wrong. Which is why we're discussing this. What we're discussing is the third model there was a question over here of old and new covenants. That's the third model. And if we're going to discuss marriage or Sabbath or food or sex or anything, it has to be done in a framework. And the framework that most of us have is wrong. Because we haven't taken marriage in the framework of 7 churches. We thought that they were unrelated subjects. Same with number 2. And now we're dealing with the third model. And we're dealing with marriage. both prophetically and literally, we have to ask ourselves, how will we understand the subject of marriage? And if you say, we'll go to Genesis 2, or we'll go to the books of the prophets, or Jesus, or Revelation, or Ellen White, you will find problems. Because most of those people that I've just mentioned are going to explain it in a framework that is no longer valid. So that's the connection between the marriage bit and these models. If we're going to talk about marriage, we need to discuss it from a framework and with the best will in the world. Ellen White's not going to be the best framework. Neither will Jeff, neither will Tess. They will not explain marriage correctly because of the framework or the world in which they live. They lived in a world that has gone. And we're living in a very different world. And we need this third model to help us to navigate these practical lessons. Question. Just question, then we'll close. Or comment.
So you developed this topic for a bit further? My mind kind of stayed on the topic of the line of failure and success. So I'm a bit confused. I got the idea of the old covenant and the new covenant, but I don't get this idea of failure and where it fits. W- When and where should we discuss and where should failure go then in this framework?
The terms failure and success come from model number 2. The term 7 churches comes from model number 1. And there's a third model, which is going to be controlled by the terms covenant. All three of them are repeating stories. They're the same story. But I think, for our purposes, the term covenant is the better word than church or success and failure. In our conversation, I used the term success and failure to help us to usher in this new term of covenant. Because most Christians think that the old covenant failed. And the evidence suggests that it succeeded. And I mentioned that in our conversation so that you would be on guard that when you think you know what Elder Tess meant when she said failure and success, that how she used those terms, that you would use them in the same way. And if you think that the old covenant failed, I can't ask her that same question. So I can only assume. I assume she would have said that it succeeded. Therefore, she must be using the word failure and success differently than we're using it. So I'm not asking us to focus on failure and success. I want us to understand the same history, but in the framework of covenants. And when you do that, and you use the word success and failure in their literal sense, the old covenant was a success, as is the new. And what we haven't discussed is why the old covenant came into existence. And I'm not saying we're going to discuss that, although I will mention it in the next study. Because I want to bring us back to the subject of marriage. But when we do discuss it, we need to discuss it in a framework, in a model, not just what our personal views and thoughts are. Let's pray. Oh.
If I understand correctly, this is you bringing light on the conversation we had, right?
I hope it's light, yes. Shemaine was so shocked I might be bringing some light. Couldn't translate it. Holy God, we thank you that you have promised to always be with us and to never fail us. So we try to understand what it is that you're doing. So we try to understand what it is you are doing, what you have done, and what you will do. May we employ the tools that you have given to us. We know that you understand our humanity, but so often we forget that we are human and we have a history. Help each of us, individually and collectively, to navigate this difficult path. In Jesus' name, amen.